The American Catholic YouTuber Taylor Marshall recently made a video on the famous Vision of the Two Popes, according to Blessed Anne-Catherine Emmerich. We had already read the texts on this subject on the Benoit et Moi blog dedicated to Pope Benedict XVI. We were only moderately motivated to listen to the same things again, but this time in English. And indeed, for the simple pleasure of listening to English, we resolved to listen to the presentation of Dr. Marshall, who speaks at a leisurely pace, clear and pleasant English. What was our surprise when the long text he commented on this vision hardly corresponded to the one we had read months before. Coming from the translation from the Italian of an article taken from Il Foglio, written by Matteo Rossi, in June 2013. This immediately piqued our curiosity. Especially since the Italian version presented the two popes as being contemporaries, which could not fail to make one think of the cohabitation in the Vatican of Pope Francis and Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, whereas the American version said that the popes lived in very distant times. Indeed, the first, Boniface IV, who is called by his name, is a pope from the beginning of the 7th century, and the other is either from the 19th century, if we take the words pope literally. Current, used by the visionary, that is to say of a later time, if this word is to be taken in a broader sense, a thesis to which we personally adhere. Pope Pius VII, the Pope of the time of the vision, which took place May 13, 1820, does not correspond to the portrait that Anne-Catherine Emmerich makes, and even less the description she makes of the new and disastrous church, with that which was under her authority at that time. We were convinced that the vision of the two popes was for our time, since the passage, "I saw the relationship between two popes," without any other indication, in fact suggested that it was indeed a coexistence between two sovereigns, legitimate pontiffs, which happened for the first time in the history of the Church with the resignation of Benedict XVI. The situation not being the same for the competing popes of the time of the Great Western Schism in the 14th century. We are grateful to Mr. Marshall for allowing us to take a step back with Matteo Rossi's article, and above all for giving us the opportunity to get to know Anne-Catherine Emmerich better. That said, Dr. Marshall's analysis appeared to us to be rather superficial, since he is content to paraphrase the long vision of May 13, 1820. As it is transcribed in the reference book of the author of the Recension des Notes from Clemens Brentano, who gave birth to the visions. Father Kieschmoger of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer translated from German in 1867, entitled Life of Anne-Catherine Emmerich. What is more, his conclusion that in the vision of Blessed Dulman the two popes are not Francis and Benedict, because Boniface is named there, can be criticized, especially if one takes into account the other visions, having had take place on other dates, which seem to be linked to that of May 13, 1820. Going through volumes 2 and 3 of Father Schmoger, one realizes that characters, such as the 12 new apostles, appear here and there in different visions that can be related. Can we say the same about our present topic? We will have to answer this question later. The word connection is precisely the one used by Matteo Rossi to compare these two popes, while Father Schmoger speaks of relation. So I also saw the relation between one and the other pope, between the one and the other temple. The vision begins with these words. This night, from 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning, I had a most marvelous vision on two churches and two popes, and on an infinity of things old and new, which tends to agree with Taylor Marshall. The two churches and the two popes would not exist at the same time, because one is a priori old and the other new. However, nothing here indicates that it is a question of a temporal seniority and novelty. If the name of Boniface IV was not mentioned afterwards, we could have interpreted these old and new things as points of doctrine, discipline, manners, rite, traditions. All the more so since the words connection and relation, which ultimately have essentially the same meaning, each have the same double meaning. A connection, or a relation, can first be understood in the sense of an act of the mind which makes a link between several distinct thought objects. But they can also mean a link between people, whether in terms of dependence, influence, morale or interest, and in this case this link results in communication, or dating. Mattia Rocci's article interpreted the word relationship in the second sense while Dr. Marshall in the first. Who can be justified? We believe that we do not need to decide and that it can be said that both are right from a certain point of view. From a material point of view, the text of May 13, 1820 effectively describes the Church of the time of Pope Boniface IV and the transformation of the pagan pantheon of Rome into a church devoted to Catholic worship and emptied of its idols. And in comparison, the same church at another later time. This does not prevent that, from a formal point of view, vision is clamped down, beyond the images, to another reality. We know, for example, that in the Apocalypse, a prophetic and obscure book par excellence, the persecutor of Christians is identified as Nero Claudius Augustus, a title which would correspond in addition, according to the process of reduced isocephia, to the number of the beast, but he is not yet the son of perdition, the Antichrist to come. Prophetic stories remain mysterious even to the visionary, they transcend time and space and their symbolism is not easily understood. The Pope Boniface could symbolize a type of sovereign pontiff which would correspond to another era. A pope who brings the holiness of God into the liturgy. Worship. Doctrine. Mores. Weak. In terms of the number of his adherents and his supporters humans, but strong by the will displayed had overthrown so many gods, I knew the number, and united so many cults in a single cult. That the latter would have the profile reversed, how many on the contrary this one was strong by name short and how weak by will. Since by authorizing the false temple, he had let the one true God and the only true religion get lost in so many false gods and false religions. She does not say that he is a corrupt man, a depraved one a la Alexandra Borgia, but only a weak one who will allow by his lack of will, in a movement opposite to that described in Boniface, to bring idolatry into the world. Catholic Church, those famous smokes of Satan of which St. Paul VI spoke. She does not say that he is a bad pope, but her lack of firmness will indirectly mean that her pontificate will not be good. In addition, we learn that the Pope of the new Church will be strong in numbers, that is, he will be successful with the multitude. Not the multitude of the faithful, which can be said of all contemporary popes, apart from a few rebellious and sorrowful spirits, but well with the multitude of people of the world. This pope will appeal to the great of this world, to powerful men, to artists, to the media, to all those who matter here below. It will please because it will go in the direction of the mundane hare. Which pope corresponds to this portrait? We only see one. Either way, this passage is no different to a post-Vatican II church and pope, as the comments accompanying the texts in the Benedict and Me blog suggest. We are going to see how many visions of Anne-Catherine reinforce this idea. The reproach that one can make to Dr. Marshall is to have been satisfied with the text of May 13, 1820 without having taken into account several other texts which give a stronger and different light to this one. Let us point out immediately that if the second church described could correspond to that of today, we do not hold the Council responsible for the situation, but for the corrupt interpretation which has been made of it by its progressive wing, by influences, hostile externalities, by those who believed they had discovered a so-called spirit of the Council, or by people who had not even read the texts. As Benedict XVI said at the beginning of the 21st century, the fruits of the Council were still expected 40 years after its closure. The new Church of the Vision is therefore not in our eyes attributable to the Council as it was willed by Saint John XXIII, completed by Saint Paul VI and put into practice by Saint John Paul II. These holy popes, whose holiness engages the infallibility of the Catholic Church and therefore the action of the Holy Spirit of God, cannot be the second pope who authorizes the false temple. On the other hand, if we take the word connection no longer as a comparison between two eras and two styles of government of the Church, but in that of frequentation, of direct relation between two pontiffs, which is a possible meaning of this word, then this vision is for our time, and for an unprecedented and unexpected situation in the history of the Church as we said above. The coexistence of two legitimate popes who live side by side. One emeritus pope who no longer governs, but supports the Church from the Vatican through his prayer and his writings, the contemplative pope. When you read certain passages from Father Schmoger's book, it is difficult not to make connections with Benedict XVI. I saw the Pope when he was having a fall. A few people had just left him immediately. He got up from his chair to get something, so he fell. When he died, I couldn't believe it was. It was still to me as if he was ruling and as if everything started from him. I saw him dead on his couch and yet it seemed to me that I saw him still acting. This fall could symbolize the controversial resignation and which one does not manage to explain. The person concerned puts forward fatigue and old age. But other hypotheses circulate on a pressure which would have been exerted on him to push him towards the exit, or on situations of the Church which seemed too heavy to bear in view of his health. Is no longer the Pope, he died at least at his charge, and yet it is as if he still governed, if he shone on the Church. Everything started from him. We read for example in the vision of June 1, 1820. I also saw the Holy Father filled with the fear of God and praying. Nothing was defective in his exterior. But he was very weakened by old age and by many sufferings. His head often wobbled from shoulder to shoulder or fell on his chest as if he were sleeping. Often also I saw him fall fainting and dying like by heavenly appearances, then his head fell. Was standing upright. But as soon as she fell on her chest, I saw several people turn quickly their heads to the right and to the left, that is to say to look in the direction of the world, or even, the Pope is so weak that he can no longer walk alone. This is the description of the Pope Emeritus as we see him at the start of the year 2021. It is also this Pope whom Blessed Emmerich tells us to live isolated, seeing hardly anyone, living a life hidden like a hermit, in accommodation in a part inside Vatican City. I see the Holy Father in great distress. He lives in another palace before and only admits a small number of friends near him. Reading the following excerpt, it is difficult not to think back to the betrayal of one of the people who was closest to him on a daily basis, his butler who stole confidential documents from his personal belongings. I had to inform him, while he was praying, about traitors and ill-intentioned people among the high officials who live in the intimacy of the Holy Father, so that he may be made aware of them. Volume 3, Chapter 12. We also read in Chapter 10 of Volume 2. I saw the Holy Father in great tribulation and great anguish affecting the Church. I saw him surrounded by betrayals. In the thesis of the word relation taken as attendance. And two contemporary popes, then Benedict XVI is the pope linked to the Church of Ancient Things, to the First Temple. This church is the Church of Saint Peter. The legitimate church. A church where the light reigned and which was provided with all kinds of graces from above, where she saw the angels ascending and descending. Of life and growth, but also of lukewarmness and dissipation. Yet she was like a tree full of sap in comparison with the other church, which resembled a chest full of inanimate devices. This church, however, built on the rock that is Saint Peter, is in danger and in perdition, and this in part because of its clergy. I saw the lukewarmness of the local clergy grow, I saw a great darkening take place. Then the vision growing on all sides. I saw Catholic communities everywhere oppressed, annoyed, constricted and deprived of liberty. I saw many churches closed. I saw great miseries occurring everywhere. I saw wars and bloodshed. Saw the fierce, ignorant people intervening with violence, but it did not last long. I again saw the vision where the Church of St. Peter was undermined, following a plan formed by the secret sect, at the same time as it was damaged by thunderstorms. In her great native Germany she saw, at most, in the country, 4 ecclesiastics remain firm and faithful. Still in her homeland, she sees a gloomy future for Catholicism. Religion has fallen very low and is preserved only in some places, in a few thatched cottages and in a few families that God has also protected in the disasters of war. The other church, the new church, is initially very successful. It attracts a lot, but it also benefits from hidden aids which we will talk about later. How to explain this success? Anne-Catherine sees the Church of the Apostates take great growth. I saw the darkness that was leaving it spread around, and I saw many people abandon the rightful church and move towards the other. Saying, there everything is more beautiful, more natural and more orderly. I do not yet see clergymen among them. Why do people like it? Firstly, because it has been in the mainstream since the 19th century of naturalism. Man no longer adheres to anything that is measured at the height of his own reason left to itself. It closes on a materialist explanation of the world, of its creation, of its evolution, of its destiny. Man is placed among animals according to Nietzsche's wishes. He lives in a closed universe that no longer needs God. Man, at best, lives according to the principles of an autonomous reason which chooses its finality, its morality, and even its essence, and at worst according only to its material senses. Hence the recurring themes of the end of the pontificate of Benedict XVI. Apostasy in the Church, indifferentism, individualism and relativism. Thus, nothing came from above in this Church. Everything came from the earth and the dark region, everything was implanted there by the planetary spirits. Everything was done according to human reason, everything remained on the earth and went into the earth, and everything was dead, artificial and man-made. It is properly a man-made church following the latest fashion, as well as the new heterodox Church of Rome, which is of the same species. She says elsewhere, I traveled through a dark and cold land and came to the big city. There I again saw the great and singular church that was being built there, there was nothing there that was holy. I saw that countless planetary spirits were working on it. And again, I saw all kinds of people and things, doctrines and opinions coming together. There was something proud, presumptuous, violent in all of this, and everything seemed to succeed, and I was shown a multitude of paintings. I did not see a single angel, nor a single saint cooperating in this work. There would be a lot to say about this passage. Let's just dwell on the word fashion. A church which wants to be in the fashion of the day cannot be the authentic Church of Christ, which is the same yesterday, today and tomorrow. Christ, who is the Word of God, does not change, just as being in oneself does not change, nor does the truth of being change. The Church, which lags behind the moods, customs, ideologies of time which by definition change with the passage of time, denies its principles and devotes itself to destruction. The truths of faith that are dogmas are immutable, as is Christ, the head of the body of the Church. The Church can deepen the expression of dogma, it can better reveal its hidden riches, but it absolutely cannot modify it, make it evolve in the direction of transformation. The visionary seems to speak here of a double new church. That of Rome and another beside it. This would seem to mean that the head of the church himself would allow it to be contaminated by his desire to be well seen. To get up to date with the ideas of the day, in matters of manners, politics, but also of faith and sacramental life. The other new church would be the remainder of the universal church spread throughout the world. We can thus better understand the allusion at the beginning to an old church and a new one. Even within the present church, a small remnant remains faithful to the deposit of faith as it has been transmitted for 2 millennia. And a majority of the same and unique church allows itself to be drawn into the depths of the waters by the sirens of modernism. Thus, this new church strongly resembles a tendency present in the post-Vatican II church. That of the famous so-called spirit of the Council, which concerned with openness and with ecumenism, understood as a need to cut off entire pieces of the seamless tunic of Christ. To make better accept his doctrine, his rites and his manners, and to get closer to the churches cut off from the communion with Rome, ended up unraveling a large part of the beautiful fabric. I live all that holds Protestantism take more and more the upper hand, and religion fall into complete decadence. I saw most of the priest's infatuation with the fake brilliance of the young schoolmaster, and all worked together for the destruction. It's a church where we made a lot of concessions to get everyone in. The bar was lowered to the maximum, we reached consensus, as politicians like to say, we showed openness, we knocked down the walls and built bridges, to use the words of Pope Francis. In his major exhortation Amoris Laetitia, which is like the road map of his pontificate, the watchword is to integrate everyone. To integrate, it is logic that must predominate in the Church. Do not exclude, thanks to a doctrine on family morality, which does not permanently divert many Christians from the life of the Church. This is already what the Jesuits of the Provincials of Pascal said. It matters not that the tables of Jesus Christ are filled with abomination, provided that your churches are full of people. Letter 16. Doesn't the aforementioned controversial exhortation correspond to this new art of building applied to the church? A man-made church following the latest fashions, a strange and contrary church. There is in Amoris a flagrant reversal of traditional moral teaching, for those who have taken the time to read the documents concerned and who know more than their childhood catechism. Not only are the major encyclicals of St. John Paul II denied, whatever some cardinals and bishops or theologians say, the principles of St. Thomas upset despite the barking of some Dominicans to avoid admitting it. But it is the very essence of many sacraments and the express command of the Lord God himself to be brought down and trampled on. They were building a large church, strange and extravagant, everyone should come in to unite and have the same rights, evangelicals, Catholics, sects of all kinds. It should be a true communion of the layman where there is no would only have a pastor and a flock. To pack as many people as possible, it is necessary to have the lowest common denominator. It was therefore necessary to arrive at freedom of conscience in the Lutheran sense of the term. I am the sole judge of my actions directly before God. This is what Amoris Laetitia now allows. If I believe that my marriage is no longer valid in my heart, if I feel in a state of grace whatever my situation, my life choices, then my conscience is the only criterion, and what it dictates to me in lieu of moral validity. This new moral theology at the heart of the pontificate contained in Chapter 8 of Amoris sheds light on an obscure passage from one of the visions. The Church of our country. When the hand emerging from the shadows seizes the mitre which was always fleeing, me was shown as in a miserable state was to contribute, particularly the scholar youngster of the school. Who is this strange youth of the school, who helped to undermine the foundations of faith and manners in Germany? We know that the school is another classic name for the scholastic theology of the Middle Ages, the absolute master of which is Saint Thomas Aquinas. He would then be a brilliant disciple of Thomas, and therefore a Dominican. In 1820 the term Germany was broader, because there existed then what was called the German Confederation, including Prussia and Austria, formed at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. And precisely, the Cardinal of Vienna, Christoph Schonborn, is a Dominican that some saw Pope after John Paul II. He would have been 60, a young enough age for a Roman pontiff. This brilliant theologian, architect of the famous and precious Catechism of the Catholic Church, surprised more than one with the Amoris affair. He took a path against all the rules by denying the heritage of his former patrons, Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI, and of his Dominican master. John Henry Weston of the LifeSite Internet channel reports that he said that we should not understand Amoris in the light of tradition, but tradition in the light of Amoris. We couldn't do a more radical turnaround. No wonder when we know that he is a great defender of the new morality advocated by Amoris. It is not a transmutation of values in the Nietzschean sense that is carried out, which would require the very negation of the idea of sin, of grace, of the soul, of beatitude and of God, but it is 180 degrees turn, like a reverse and negative conversion. We are not beyond good and evil. However, when a sin objection situation becomes meritorious and worthy of sanctifying grace, the evil is replaced by the good. When fornication or adultery, which for a Saint Thomas are bad acts in themselves, péché mâle, are buried under a lot of mitigating circumstances to remove the sinful aspect, to the point of making them good, it is possible to say that there is not an inversion of all values, according to the last words of the Antichrist of Nietzsche, but at least an inversion of some Catholic values. This new church is paradoxically empty and full. It sees many faithful deserting the legitimate church and going towards it, and at the same time, its temple is quite empty of people but full of idols. Idols are people's personal passions, their vices, their stomachs, sex, selfish pleasures, but also their own self elevated to the rank of God. We adore ourselves, we do what we like, we choose our morality, our religion. It is relativism and indifferentism that Benedict XVI spoke of. All denominations are equal in the supermarket of religious beliefs, as long as they suit what matters to me, my situation, my desires. The most restrictive, the most demanding of all, especially in moral matters, is obviously Catholicism. How can we be surprised that a lot of people abandon it? Below the current Pope Francis, below can be understood here under his pontificate, but also because of his decisions, his lack of firmness, his imprecisions, his casuistry. Another dark church had been formed in Rome. It was in a large and old house, similar to a town hall. There were columns in the front. I saw in this church neither altar nor sanctuary, but only benches, and in the middle like a pulpit. People preached and sang there. There was nothing more. Very few people attended. But I saw a singular spectacle. Each one drew an idol from his bosom. Different. Placed it in front of him and adored it. It was as if each one put outside his intimate thought the passion which animated him, in the form of a black cloud, which, when he was outside, immediately took a determined figure. The strangest thing was that all these idols filled the whole hall, and that the church, where the assistants were few, was full of idols, so much so that there was hardly enough room. When they had finished, the God of each one returned to him. This passage would require many comments. We have already mentioned the fact that in this temple, everyone worships whatever they want, and either makes their own god or chooses which god to worship. God does not reveal himself to man from the outside, in a downward movement from a transcendence, but is immanent in man and arises from his own thought. This is the very essence of modernism. The temple is empty of statues because it is emptied of the holiness represented by the statues of the saints. But even worse, there is no longer an altar or a tabernacle, sanctuary. Why does Anne-Catherine Emmerich say that this church has become Protestant? Because mainly the sacrifice of the Mass, the priesthood and the sacraments that go with it have disappeared. They were kneading bread in the lower vault, the sacristy. But nothing happened and we were working in vain. The host is replaced by a simple bread which brings nothing to souls because the intention is no longer to make present the sacrifice of Christ on the cross but to symbolically commemorate this distant moment. When we know that in the United States, 70% of the Catholic faithful do not believe in the real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist, and that in France less than 4% of baptized Catholics go regularly to Mass, that is to say that more than 86% of them do not see the need to travel to receive the host. A sign that this bread is only a symbol and not an essential remedy for the salvation of the soul, a viaticum for keep the faith alive. We no longer see much difference with Protestantism. The sacrifice is abolished and the priesthood becomes useless. I do not yet see clerics among them. Conscience has become autonomous as we have seen, so we can directly confess our faults to God. No more sacrament of penance. No more sacrament of order. No more sacrament of the Eucharist but simple impanation or symbolic presence of Christ in the bread. No more extreme unction or communion of saints, because each one manages with his idol and salvation is no longer a question of merit. Holiness is no longer an interior transformation of the whole being through sacramental grace and the personal practice of the virtues. Ever since Luther proclaimed that original sin mortally wounded the will, that there is no more free will but a serf will, that concupiscence is invincible, that man remains a sinner, and that Christ hides his misery without to be able to take it away from him, then merit and grace are useless. Man does not sanctify himself and participate in his salvation by becoming holy as the Father is holy. The sacraments do not produce what they signify. These are just symbols that we can easily do without. Some will also say that the adoration of the Pachamama statuettes in the Vatican gardens, on the occasion of the Amazon Synod, is literally the reintroduction of idolatry into the Church, the exact opposite of what Pope Boniface had done in the Pantheon. Now let's see who are the architects of this strange church. Upstream. According to the visions of the blessed, we find a secret sect which is not against all expectations Freemasonry, which does not prevent the latter from working for centuries in the work of undermining and demolition. I saw again the vision where the Church of St. Peter was undermined, according to a plan formed by the secret sect, at the same time that it was damaged by thunderstorms. Here, the sect can be understood this way. But in another passage we read, I passed by Frankfurt which was on my way, and I saw in a big house, not far from the big church, a company meeting which will put in deliberation of bad projects. I saw there ecclesiastics, or, there were in Rome, even among the prelates, many people of un-Catholic feelings who worked for the success of this affair. I also saw in Germany worldly ecclesiastics and enlightened Protestants manifesting desires and forming a plan for the amalgamation of religious denominations, and for the suppression of papal authority. Finally, the visionary tells us that it was a question of establishing several superior chiefs, of suppressing a lot of expenses by reducing the number of ecclesiastics, and this plan had, in Rome itself, instigators among the prelates. I have often considering that Cardinal C. is worth nothing, that he does a lot of harm and that he hates his father. But he is too far ahead in business and we cannot dismiss him. He is also completely circumvented by the secret sect. It is a very widespread association. It works faster, but moreover more superficially than the Freemasons. It is not about Freemasonry. Could this be the project for a world order with one world religion? Difficult to say. But when Anne-Catherine Emmerich specifies that they want to take away from the pastor his pasture, they want to impose one that delivers everything to the enemies. Then, seized with anger, she raised her closed fist, saying, rascals of Germans, names like Caspar and Lehmann come to mind. We could add prelates from other countries. Daniels, Martini and Murphy O'Connor, who were all part of what has been called the St. Gall Mafia, who allegedly made Francis sit on Peter's pulpit. Cardinal Daniels, who appeared right behind him on the balcony during his first appearance, and who had nothing to do there according to protocol, boasted in his autobiography of having made Pope Francis. Would they have helped Benedict to leave the free space by taking away his pasture? We will probably never know. However, it remains strange to read Anne-Catherine revealing to us that she saw in a garden a new bishop with the crook, the mitre and all the rest. I saw Protestants around him who wanted to bring him down into the garden, but not with the conditions that the Pope had demanded. They tried to slip in by all kinds of means. I saw them intercept and divert the ways which went to the Pope. I then saw that when they introduced the bishop in the manner that they had volunteered, he was intruder, introduced against the will of the Pope, and he did not legitimately possess spiritual authority. We can wonder if the secret preparation for the election of Francis, against the firm ban of Pope Pius X, Vacante sede apostolica. Pius XII. Vacantus apostolici sedis. Paul VI. Romani Pontifici elegendo. And John Paul II. Constitution Universi Dominici Gregis of 1996. To meet secretly upstream to favor the election of a cardinal in order to orient the government of the Church according to partisan views, does not make it invalid. Because even the simony is no longer recognized as a case of invalidation of an election, contrary to what Julius II said in the 15th century, but at least illegal. The current pope, if all this turns out to be true, wouldn't he be an illegitimate pope? We are sure at the very least that the prelates of this mafia, if these suspicions are correct, all deserve the excommunication latae sententiae, according to the documents cited above. However, This great and singular church that we were building will quickly reach its limits. Because it is only a poor purely human work, and the results of this new art of building applied to the church are made to feel in a dramatic way. I found myself, she said, in a completely pierced ship, and I was lying at the bottom, in the only small place that was still intact. People were seated on both sides of the ship. I prayed continually that they would not be thrown into the waves, yet they mistreated me and kicked me. I saw the ship every moment as it sank, and I was sick to death. Finally they were forced to take me to land, where my friends were waiting to take me to another place. I always prayed that these unfortunate people would also disembark. But no sooner was I on the shore that the ship sank to the bottom, and none of those who were there escaped, which filled me with sadness. Here we are witnessing the exact opposite of the famous vision of the three whiteness of Saint Don Bosco. The Blessed Virgin, logically absent from a Protestantized church, finally appears to save the church of her Son, deserving one of her many titles. Destroyer of all heresies. But modernism, the real one, not that of which the Vatican Council II is accused, is, in the words of Pius X, the synthesis of all heresies. This word, which comes from the Greek, to choose, is appropriate perfectly for this new temple in which each one chooses his personal idol. But I also saw the help arrive at the moment of the most extreme distress. I again saw the Blessed Virgin ascend the church and spread her mantle. When I had this last spectacle, I no longer saw the present Pope. Saw one of his successors. I saw him both gentle and severe. He knew how to attach good priests to himself and push the bad ones away from him. I saw everything being renewed, and a church which rose to heaven. Christ and his mother have the last word. We will end on this note of hope for the Catholic Church and for her faith. If all this interpretation, which only engages us, is true, it gives us the hope to see the boat of Peter advance again in the open sea and once again operate miraculous catches.